Are you tired of starting H. pylori treatment only to feel worse? Or maybe you've been through a round or two and it still didn't clear. There's one organism that keeps showing up in the research that is a difference maker, and almost no one is talking about it. Let's start with what matters most, the facts and the fix. So if you only stay for a minute, you're going to leave with value. The research on Saccharomyces boulardii for H. pylori, it is surprisingly consistent. And it's not just one random study. There's quite a few out there. So when you add up what Saccharomyces boulardii does to a standard H. pylori protocol and why you would consider adding it, well, here's a few facts to know. It increases the eradication rates by 5 to 10%. Not a staggeringly big number, but it is a consistent improvement. The side effects go down by almost 50%. I think most of us would take that, and that's going to allow you to probably finish your treatment if you haven't been able to see your H. pylori treatment all the way through. And not to overlook this, but you're also going to get a faster recovery after your treatment. Most H. pylori treatments are going to disrupt the gut function in some way, so if you could speed up that recovery process, wouldn't you want to do that? The truth is that Saccharomyces boulardii, it's not killing H. pylori. That's not what it's doing. It's supporting the overall terrain in the stomach and in the small intestine. And that's how it supports the H. pylori protocol. Now, I'm just getting started on this conversation around Saccharomyces boulardii and H. pylori. But if you like where we're going so far, how about hitting that like and subscribe button? And you might as well go ahead and share this video with someone that you think might be struggling with this same scenario. Now, if you're new around here, I'm Dr. Arland Hill. I'm a clinician and a rancher. And that allows me to see both sides of the story, the physiology and the food. And whether we're talking about beef, chicken, SIBO, H. pylori, guys, my approach is always the same. You have to fix the terrain. You have to give the body what it needs. And when you do that, well, everything else just seems to fall in place. Let's take a quick recap of what H. pylori actually does. H. pylori is going to decrease the stomach acid production, if not outright just completely knock it out to where it just becomes inadequate to optimally digest your foods. It does that through damaging the lining of the stomach. There's specific cells within the lining of the stomach, parietal cells, that are directly damaged by H. pylori. And when this plays on for long enough, you may experience symptoms like gastritis, just inflammation in the stomach. You may have reflux, you may have nausea. But if this is allowed to play out for an extensive period of time, it may also present more significant concerns. We've seen links to Parkinson's disease, gastric cancer. I mean, the associations are pretty lengthy here, and they're not ones that we should be overlooking. And maybe also important in that context of the bigger picture is that H. pylori kicks the door open for other overgrowths of bacteria and fungus to take place in the small intestine. Many times what we refer to simply as SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. H. pylori can be hard to eradicate due to the fact that it really does a good job of adhering to the lining of the cells in the stomach, and not to mention it's very efficient at building biofilms or protective layers around itself. And this is also in part why some individuals can start treatment and begin to feel worse, because you're really not getting the benefit of that intervention. The side effects, if they start to accumulate, many individuals will just give up on the protocol and not see it through. But if you really want to deal with H. pylori, logically, you got to see that protocol all the way through. Now, it's easy to blame the antibiotic here. And the reason it's easy to blame the antibiotic is because many times the recommendation has been triple therapy. So 1 acid blocker and 2 antibiotics. Well, over time, as H. pylori, a highly genetically adaptable organism, has continued to develop resistance, we've seen the implementation of 3 antibiotics, and now we're all the way up to 4 antibiotics with the acid blocker. But clearly this can't sustain. This is not an ideal strategy on an ongoing basis to keep using with H. pylori. Not to mention that many individuals just don't want to use antibiotics for obvious reasons. Because the problem is not the antibiotic though. Focusing on the antibiotic is missing the bigger picture here. What we're not keeping an eye on is the terrain, the environment in the body, the environment in the stomach. That's what we need to be looking at. And here's honestly the part that no one is telling you around this. And that is that if you've never heard of Saccharomyces boulardii, then you truly don't understand how big of an ally this beneficial fungus can be when it comes to managing H. pylori and eradicating, and I'll use that term specifically here because we want to eradicate H. pylori. Saccharomyces boulardii is going to boost these eradication rates. Now, it's going to do it modestly. It's not going to be this dramatic increase in the eradication rate. But the point here, I think the bigger point about this is that it reliably generates a 5 to 10% increase in successful eradication. Why wouldn't you want to put every possible percentage in your court to have every percentage advantage? Of course you want to do that. And this concept that I'm talking about with you here, this is backed up not by a single study out there. There's not one double-blind, randomized, controlled trial that suggests this. There's major meta-analyses out there that are supporting this observation after they've looked at multiple studies. And whether you're doing triple therapy or quadruple therapy, or you're using something like bismuth, whatever your intervention is against H. pylori directly, layering in Saccharomyces boulardii is going to improve it. And remember, Saccharomyces boulardii is not the killer, right? It's not what you're introducing into the protocol to try to have a direct killing effect. It's going to amplify and multiply whatever your antimicrobial strategy is directly against H. pylori. Now, the other thing that's extremely advantageous here is that it's going to cut the side effects in half. This is one of the biggest concerns around the implementation of antibiotics, is that you get all of the side effects associated with that, the disruption, the kill off of the bacteria, you lose control of the microbial environment in the GI tract, and that's going to lead to things like constipation, diarrhea, bloating. It's just an excess gas. All of these things typically come along with that. But when you have Saccharomyces boulardii in the picture, these symptoms are reduced by approximately 50%. That's the consistent observation, is about a 50% observation. And that's going to translate into, if you've struggled as you've gone through your H. pylori protocol, well, now you're going to be able to get through your H. pylori protocol more easily. But also when you get to the end of your H. pylori protocol, there's not going to be all the fallout and complications where you're developing these problematic pathogenic fungal strains are beginning to take over in the gut when you're implementing those antibiotics. When you have Saccharomyces boulardii there, it prevents that from happening. They control the gut. And most people will fail treatment if they just don't see it through because of these side effects. It's not because of the infection itself, it's because of the problems they're running into with the medications. This can offset a large portion of that. But that's not all, guys. Remember, this is a terrain conversation. And this is the bigger picture here, is that we want to continue to have the terrain of the GI tract optimized. Well, if we're going to do that, Saccharomyces boulardii should be absolutely something we're reaching for. And why is that? Well, the reason is because it's going to increase our secretory IgA. This is the primary immune system protein locally in your gastrointestinal tract. It's increasing that directly. It's going to protect your microbiota diversity during the antibiotics. So this goes back to what I'm saying, is that you're not allowing all those problematic fungal species to set in. And many times when that does happen, this is where the leaky gut, the loss of the integrity of the barrier in your small intestine, this is where you begin to lose that and develop the leaky gut. Well, Saccharomyces boulardii offsets that. And that means that you don't get the follow-up inflammation associated with it, and the overall recovery time is going to be much less than what it was. And it also means that if you are prone to developing, say, an overgrowth in your small intestine afterwards, say SIBO or SIFO, small intestinal bacterial or fungal overgrowth, well, you're dealing with these terrain problems, and lo and behold, Saccharomyces boulardii, I've referred to this as the no-brainer solution in SIBO, and this is the exact same rationale for why. And this strain of fungus, this beneficial fungal strain, it works for a lot of reasons. And let me just kind of give you a few reasons of why it does such an efficient job, because it's not a one-trick pony. It has a lot of mechanisms that it deploys. So for one, it's going to block the adhesion of the Hpylori directly to the lining of the stomach. So it offsets that direct adhesion. It's going to bind up these toxins that are coming from the Hpylori. That organism, that bacteria, is notorious for shedding off toxins. It's going to keep your immune system optimized locally in that environment. It's going to decrease the inflammation in the mucosa, which is that mucus layer. You don't want that mucus layer having inflammation going on there. You want that mucus layer to be the binding trap. You want it to trap things that need to be excreted out. And that's what Saccharomyces boulardii supports, that process. It's also going to be able to directly compete with other pathogens without colonizing permanently. In fact, within about 3 to 5 days after you discontinue the utilization of Saccharomyces boulardii, it has left the body. So it's not residual, it's in there to do a job and to leave. And it's also, and I feel like I've said this before, but I've got to say this again, that dysbiosis, the imbalance of the microbiota that comes from using antibiotics, Saccharomyces boulardii is going to offset that. So even if you have to use an antibiotic for some other reason besides H. pylori, Saccharomyces boulardii can be a very advantageous adjunct to deploy at the same time. Now you may be asking yourself, how much of this should I be using? Like, give me more specifics about what I need to be using here. Well, I'll give you a couple of ways to look at this. Typically, you want to dose this as 1 capsule twice a day. You generally don't need to use more than that. Usually 1 twice a day of about any of these is going to be advantageous in my experience. That's about the dose you're looking for, at least 1 per day. The strain that you'll see utilized in a lot of these studies is your Saccharomyces boulardii CNCM I745. And obviously that one works really well because it's giving the outcomes talked about in this study. But I will tell you that is not the strain that I use here. I'll actually put up on the screen the strain that I use. And the reality is that I think this has more to do with Saccharomyces boulardii just being a consistent, making sure it's a quality strain as opposed to getting so bogged down in the strain. I've looked at different strains and they all seem to yield these outcomes. So I would not advise getting so bogged down in that specific strain. I think that's a waste of time, to be honest with you. When you do start to implement this, I would implement this exactly on day 1 at the same time you use that antibiotic, and I would continue that throughout the entirety of the antibiotic. So that may be 10 to 14 days, depending on what your course is. Could be even longer. So however long you're using the antibiotics, and maybe even go a few days past that just to be on the safe side to maintain the stability of and the balance of the microbiota in your gut, until you can take some further actions to rebuild your own beneficial species. Just don't give your problematic organisms, your pathogenic or dysbiotic organisms, the ones you don't want there, don't give them an opportunity to grow and to take over. And so again, point there is just continue beyond when you discontinue. Now, I do want to give you also some context about the overall terrain, right? So if you look at everything I've shared with you in this video, the one thing that you should come back to here is that this is all about the terrain. And Saccharomyces boulardii is working to maintain that terrain and not allow the implementation of the antibiotic to create massive disruption in the terrain of your GI tract. And so Saccharomyces boulardii is going to be an adjunct to these therapies, and you could use this with not just an antibiotic, but if you want to go the route of an herbal antimicrobial, which is what I do, if you want to use an herbal antimicrobial against H. pylori, Saccharomyces boulardii works very well in that context too. And remember, if you're trying to rebuild the immunoglobulins, the secretory IgA, that's key to H. pylori, that's key to SIBO. It's really key to this whole terrain story, and maintaining these optimum secretions, like everything I've talked about in other videos that you may want to go back and look at. That's what Saccharomyces boulardii is going to act as an adjunct towards. It's literally just amplifying all these other aspects of your gut physiology. And I will say, even though I did not call the Saccharomyces boulardii a no-brainer solution for H. pylori, I did call it a no-brainer solution for SIBO. However, I do think that because of the clear advantages that it has and no downside, this is all pros and no cons for the implementation of Saccharomyces boulardii. Is it a panacea? No. But what it is going to do is it is going to skew everything in your favor. And, quite frankly, if you've got to go through the process of trying to eradicate something like H. pylori, wouldn't you want everything you could in your favor? If you've struggled with H. pylori treatment, well, now you know why, and now you've got an ally that you can lean on. This is not just about killing the bacteria. That's where these conversations so frequently end, and that is missing the mark. This is about supporting the terrain so that your treatment can actually work and, more importantly, actually last. That's what we're looking for. Saccharomyces boulardii, whether you're talking about H. pylori or SIBO, is going to be able to do that. If this conversation today has opened your eyes to think about H. pylori in a new way, guys, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button, and make sure you share this video with someone so that other folks out there that are struggling with chronic gut issues can hear this information as well. And if you want to see how Saccharomyces boulardii becomes a no-brainer solution for SIBO as well, go ahead and watch the video on the screen. It's one that started this whole thought process around Saccharomyces boulardii and just how beneficial it can be.